Kaya? Okay, come in.
The jacket or with the shirt, David?
Listen, I'm going to change also. In future, I'm going to start putting on a jacket.
So should I take a jacket or a shirt?
No, I don't think so. I think you should.
A jacket.
Yeah, I do think you should have a jacket.
Okay. You're the master marketer, as they say.
I don't know. How did this? Have you let anybody in, huh?
Yes.
I think you can start Facebook.
He did.
You started? Okay. Welcome, everybody. As I said last week, the Lubavitch Rebbe had a dream. And the dream was that one day Mashiach will come. And when Mashiach comes, there'll be no more war, no more suffering, no more sickness. It will be a time of spiritual and materialistic plenty. In order to accomplish this, the Rebbe sent emissaries throughout the world. Each city, each country has its own challenges. To me, it seems that America right now has serious challenges. And what happens in America affects the entire world. To discuss this, I welcome Rabbi Yudi Shem Tov, an emissary in Philadelphia, home of the Constitution. Rabbi Shem Tov.
Thank you, David, Rabbi Mesinter. And before we continue into the core of our conversation, let's all take a deep breath. Are we on?
Sure.
Yes? Okay, let's all take a deep breath and thank the Eibishter, Hoidel Hashem Ki Tov, that we're alive and we're able to connect with each other. And despite all the challenges and darkness that has ascended into our world, there's a lot of light and a lot of goodness, and we should cherish that and be thankful for that. You know, when Rabbi Mesinter calls me from South Africa, anybody who knows me knows that South Africa has a very soft and warm spot in my heart. The 2 primary years of my adolescence or young adulthood, I spent in yeshiva in Johannesburg as a shliach of the Rebbe for the Yeshiva Gedola, and 55 Oaklands Road and 20 Pine Road and Johannesburg and Orchard and Sandton. These are all things that just bring up such great positive energy in itself. So it's always a pleasure to be with you, although it's virtual, but I feel so connected and so warmed by the beautiful and wonderful feelings that the South African Jewish community produces, still till today. And in fact, when I saw the publicity for today's talk that Rabbi Mesinter sent out, it took me straight back to the summer before I went to Johannesburg in 1986. Because the picture of that, I'm looking at it now, that flame, that bursting fire and protest was exactly the same picture that was on Time magazine, not the exact picture, the same type of picture in the summer of 1986, describing South Africa and the burning tires in Soweto. And while we were preparing to go to South Africa for the shlichus, we're all wondering what's going on there. This whole country's falling apart. And I remember Rabbi Lipsker speaking to us, Rabbi Weinberg, don't worry, this isn't the way it is. It's just a picture, it's the media, it's a beautiful country. And in fact, it was. So although these may be some pictures that you find today in the media about America, the United States, relax. America is a beautiful country. People are living normally under these circumstances. Of course, there are very serious challenges to the fundamentals of our country, but it's not as if the country is falling apart, but it is a time to have a serious reflection on the fundamental ideas upon which our country was built, upon which America was built. And you know, everything's hashgacha pratis. Everything is by divine providence. God directs everything in in a perfect way. And the fact that we're talking about this today is a very incredible hashgacha pratis, because in just a few days, this upcoming Shabbos on Saturday in the secular calendar is July 4th. And July 4th is the day that we celebrate our independence. That is the day that the Declaration of Independence was formally ratified, and therefore the independence was declared, although it was signed a few weeks later. But this became our annual holiday and celebrating the independence and the foundation of the United States of America, this Saturday, July 4th. But this Shabbos is another very important day. This Shabbos is the 12th of Tammuz. It's Yud Beis Tammuz. And that is the day that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was released and freed from complete freedom from prison in Russia, in the Soviet Union. And that is an incredible Yom Tov on the Hasidic calendar. And the fact that these 2 days coincide, the 12th of Tammuz and July 4th, may seem a coincidence, but there's a fascinating correlation between the two. You know, when we talk about, and I'll explain that now, when we talk about Philadelphia, Philadelphia is a very important city in the history of the United States and also for the Jewish people. People are very surprised to know that the Jewish population of Philadelphia is one of the top 3 or 4 in the country. And, you know, people think about Jewish communities, you think about New York, Miami, LA. Philadelphia is a top 3, 4, depends which census you look at and which population studies you look at. But the reality is that Philadelphia is a very, very central part to the Jewish community. The name Philadelphia has a very strong relationship with Lubavitch. The name Philadelphia means city of brotherly love. Lubavitch was the town of brotherly love. So the ideas of Lubavitch, of love and understanding of other people, and Philadelphia have a very deep connection. Now, in Philadelphia, because it was such a stronghold, and is, of Jewish life, the Rebbe actually made it a place where the previous Rebbe, one of the first places he visited on a very historic visit to America in 1929 and 1930. So let's go back a little bit. It's Yud Beis Tammuz, it's the 12th of Tammuz, the summer of 1927, which is a summer that the previous Rebbe was liberated, this Shabbos. And just less than 3 years later, in 1929, in December 15th, the previous Rebbe visits the city of Philadelphia as one of his first stops in his trip to America. Because, as I said, Philadelphia was a very, very important city of Jewish life. And the first place that the Frierdiker Rebbe, that the previous Rebbe visits when he comes to Philadelphia, is the heart of Philadelphia, which is known as Independence Mall. Independence Mall is where was the headquarters, or what we would call today the White House, the Capitol. What's in Washington today was what was Independence Mall back in 1776. That was the seat of the fledgling American government. And the first place that the Frierdiker Rebbe wanted to visit is Independence Hall, which is the Capitol building at that point on this mall. Now, it's about a 15-minute drive from the train station. And the train station is on 30th and Market. This is on 5th and Market. And it's incredible how the Rebbe writes about his trip into Philadelphia. It was a 2-hour train ride, which hasn't changed much, interestingly enough. But then he describes the trip from the train to Independence Hall. And it was such a elaborate parade. There's escort, there's thousands of people, many, many cars. It was really a royal welcome. And this isn't insignificant, because when the previous Rebbe writes about this escort, as how he had this royal escort from the government, he writes clearly, and not like it was when I was escorted to Spalenka, which was a Soviet prison that he was staying at. So in the Rebbe's mind, there was a kind of finality, in a sense, to the liberation, that from that type of escort, he was able to receive this type of escort in a land of freedom. Now, when the Rebbe visits the Independence Mall, he's right away directed into the hall, the actual room where they signed the Declaration of Independence, and number of years later, the actual Constitution. And they offered the Frierdiker Rebbe an opportunity that is only offered for other visiting leaders of countries or kings, and that was to actually sit on the chair that George Washington sat when he was managing all the deliberations for this freedom. And the previous Rebbe took this as a very, very significant opportunity and sign. And when he sat on that chair, he gave tremendous brachas to the government of the United States of America. Now, that in itself was very valuable. But next to this room was another room in Independence Hall, which is where they had the very famed Liberty Bell. Now the Liberty Bell has its own pavilion on the mall outside of the building. But at that point, for many years, it was in the Independence Hall. And then the Rebbe was taken to the Liberty Bell and laid a wreath right at the foot of the bell. And he said these words: "Liberty based on faith is the most proper and the strongest." I'm going to repeat that because it's very specific. Liberty based on faith is the most proper and strongest. And it's very interesting. When you read the newspaper reporter, what the reporter wrote in the newspaper at that point, it was called the Welt, the world in English, he quotes the Rebbe as saying, liberty based on faith is the strongest. In the Rebbe's own words, in his own diary, he writes that he said liberty based on faith is the most proper and the strongest. And that is a very, very important nuance. Because why is liberty based on faith the strongest? Because it's the most proper foundation to build liberty. And because on the Liberty Bell, they have a quote from the Torah, I assume that's what inspired this comment. So there's a very strong connection about the times we are now in the Jewish calendar, and to really revisit, what does the Constitution mean to us? What does the Constitution mean for America? But more importantly, not for us as Americans and not for the country, but what do we glean from the Frierdiker Rebbe's insight into what was the core of the Constitution? And this idea was developed at length for the many years that the Rebbe spoke to us. And coming now from the third day of Tammuz, Gimel Tammuz, when we observed the Yartzeit, and we kind of really connected to the Rebbe on a deeper level, as we do in every Yartzeit, gleaning from these two leaders of ours on the shores of America should hopefully allow us to be able to approach these times in a very meaningful and productive way. Because let's be honest, I'm sure Rabbi Masinter didn't call me to be a political analyst, a social analyst, and to give you a deeper insight into the political situation. There are many more greater experts than I, and frankly, I don't get it myself completely. But I try to be a chassid, and we try to always look to Chassidus, not only to understand the great Kabbalistic ideas of the greater spiritual worlds, but to really get a better insight into our world. And therefore, gleaning from these two great luminaries in our life, from the statement of the Frierdiker Rebbe about faith is the most proper and strongest foundation, and the teachings of our Rebbe in how to apply these ideas, hopefully will provide you the inspiration that we're all looking for. So first, let's talk about the greater, bigger ideas that are in these words, and then we will bring it back and apply it to a more specific plan of action in our lives. Why is freedom based on faith the proper way to go about freedom? And the idea is because faith, emunah in Hashem, is not just a abstract, detached idea that if all else fails, just have faith in God. Just give it up and and subjugate yourself or submit yourself, as they say, to a greater power. That's not what emunah, that's not what faith is really in Yiddishkeit, in Judaism. Faith is an actual strong tool that we have in order to be able to understand things better. See, faith doesn't negate understanding. It lifts it up. It gives it a greater context through which we can look and understand things that are happening. In the last mimer that we all studied just last week, that the Rebbe left us before his passing, there's such a strong conversation about what faith truly is and how we tap into that faith, not to deny ourselves of what we are dealing with, but to really have a deeper way of understanding what it is that we're dealing with. And to really understand the core of American Constitution of freedom and equality for all, you must have faith. Because the only time that life really matters for anyone, and the only way we can really look at people equally, regardless of race, gender, ideas, is when you understand that everyone was created by Hashem. When we have an understanding that there is a God who creates this world for a purpose, and everyone in this world is part of that purpose, that everyone is equally important. We're very different, we are diverse, but diversity is not something that is created to set us apart. Diversity was created for all of us to be able to touch on different points for an equally important message and an equally important mission that Hashem has given us. So true freedom, the proper freedom, is when we understand each other's value, not based on superficial things, but on their true inherent value as being created by Hashem to fulfill a purpose in this world. When freedom is based on that idea, then it truly is the strongest freedom that can be, because it's not a freedom declared by other humans or decided by other humans. It's a freedom that other humans realize are endowed by the Creator, by Hashem. And the Rebbe has addressed this many times through the years in very strong words. The Rebbe has constantly declared, and we all know about the famous push and effort of the Rebbe, but having a moment in silence in the public school. It wasn't just about kids praying. The Rebbe said it's not about praying to God. It's about reflecting, having a moment of silence to understand, as in the Rebbe's words, that this world is not a jungle. In a jungle, every animal, as you well know in South Africa, every animal lives its life, and the strongest wins. That's not the way it is in God's world. God's world is a garden and not a jungle. And the entire years of teachings of the Rebbe, of Basi Lagani, to understand that we're in a garden of God as opposed to a jungle, is critical, because in a garden, everything is planted for a reason. You have the small little flower, this plant, you have the trees. A true garden, beautiful garden, every little aspect is very important to the overall beauty of the garden. So it's only when you really understand that there is a creator, as the founding fathers of America understood, then you can have a strong country. Then you can have a strong society. And this is what we need to understand. What was the core of our Constitution? What was the core of our country? So not that we have a history lesson, so that we can live history and live our lives in this context in a very meaningful and purposeful way. But we're living now in a time that all these ideas seem to be falling apart. People are marching and people are protesting. They're not even understanding what they are protesting about. And therefore, we go to a very similar situation in American history and look at the guiding words of our Rebbe, our Nasi, our leader, during the 60s. We all know the upheaval of the 60s, when morals and ethics were all falling apart. There's a similar, although different, but similar attack on the Constitution and the fundamentals of what made our country so great and what made people so great. And people were very scared, very frustrated, very unsettled. But the clear voice of our Moshe, of our leader, of our feeder of faith, taught us that don't look at the challenges and don't look at the negativity, but look at the opportunity, that this is a power and an energy that is being unleashed, perhaps in a negative way. But this same energy that is available now can and must be channeled in a proper way. So this energy on the one hand that broke apart things, don't look at it that way. Make sure you take this opportunity and take this new unleashed energy and try to channel it into an opportunity, into something greater. Because this is what Hashem wants of us. This is what Hashem has meant in everything that happens in his world. Faith doesn't just mean equality of value to all people. Faith and emunah, the Rebbe teaches us, is equality in all opportunities and all situations, that they're all there to help us create stronger purpose and stronger meaning. So let's apply this in context, these great ideas, into relevance today. Because, you know, everything is about context. I just heard this story. They say this doctor, a doctor who was always on call, a very famous doctor, was never home. He was never able to be home. He was always on call and running to the hospital to patients and people bothering him, calling him. Finally, he found this quiet Friday. Things were quiet in his office, unusual. Calls his wife. He says, honey, I'll be home this evening. Let's have a wonderful evening. Let's have a good dinner with the kids. Let's make sure everybody's together. We have a good time. It's rare. Wife is all excited. She prepares a dinner. The kids are around the table. Dad's coming home for dinner. Dad comes home. And as he's about to sit down, the phone rings. Phone rings. All right, everybody's, there it goes again. He's on the other line. He's on the other line. And his friend said, hey, Joe. Says, Joe, you are available now. Says, why? What's up? Says, you know, 3 of us are now on the golf course, and we need a 4th to complete our foursome. And you're the only one available. Can you come over? He thinks a moment, says, don't worry, I'll be right over. He tells his wife, I'm sorry, I gotta go. Something urgent came up, I need to leave. The wife looks at him and says, well, how urgent is it? He says, I don't know, but there are already 3 physicians on location. So, you know, everything is context, how you present something, how we understand something. So these great teachings of the Frierdiker Rebbe, philosophically about freedom, and the Rebbe's teachings throughout the years of what brings freedom are good ideas, but the Rebbe's always talked about tachlis. What does this mean to us physically and in our times? So the reality is what's going on in America, I feel, is part of the overall problem that's going on in our world. And that is the pandemic, Corona. Corona has affected every human being, whether you have the physical disease, God forbid, whether unfortunately someone that you know passed away, but every one of us has been affected by Corona, if not physically, definitely spiritually and emotionally. Because Corona has forced us to really understand and face ourselves. What is life really all about? It has forced us into asking ourselves some very existential questions. Why are we here? Many of the things that we valued 3 months ago, life was just moving on and things are going well generally. And all of a sudden, bam, you hit this brick wall and things fall apart. And guess what? The only thing that's left that hasn't fallen apart is, if thank God you're alive, is that you're alive. But how you lived your life has changed completely. And we're forced to really find our own truths. And you know what? We don't always like the truths that are really driving our lives. It's not always comfortable to face your truth. And every one of us in this entire universe has been forced to ask ourselves questions. Does life matter? What about life matters? And my friends, it's going to be a big shame if we get out on the other end and we don't have clearer questions. If we go right back into the routines, ideological and actual, that we wore before this. And if we don't look at this last 3 months as an opportunity to really move forward in life with greater purpose and meaning, what did the 3 months accomplish? But the reality is, the upheavals we are seeing today is not just affecting one segment of the population. It's not just a question if a particular life matters. we all ask our question, does life matter really? And what in life really matters? Now, let's not make a mistake. There are serious issues of racism that are taking place in this world. And there are serious issues of anti-Semitism that are spreading across the world. But this is the question. What do we do about it? What can I really do about it? You know, there are people that have influence. There are people that write the laws and can change the laws. But me and you, we're, at least most of us, we're just ordinary individuals. And we can say, no, that's life. What can I do about it? And the answer of Torah is you can do something about it. The question is, what's the it? Can I change a rule and law in Congress? I can't. Can I change who's the president or who's the Congress, if the senator, if that's what I feel needs to be? I'm one vote. And that vote only takes place once every 4 years or 2 years, depends what you're voting for. Does that mean the other 3, 4 years, the other years, I can't make a difference? Of course you can. And this is what the Torah is trying to teach us. And this is what the Rebbe teaches us so powerfully, that don't think that because there's these big global issues, it doesn't mean you can't do anything about it. In fact, your life matters. You were woke up this morning and God gave you life, it matters. And you can make a difference. The question is, understand what the difference is that you can make. But if you're alive today in this situation, you matter. And we all need to ask ourselves, how do I matter? And how am I making my life change the reality that is around us? The klal and the prat, the Rebbe taught us. There are people that have the opportunity to change global issues. But changing global issues doesn't mean your local and individual issue doesn't make a difference. And you know, they say there's 3 types of people. Those that watch things happen, those that make things happen, and those that don't even know what happened. No one alive today can say that they don't know what's happening. The only question is, are we going to watch things happen, or are we going to make things happen? And the Rebbe tells us, you can make things happen. This is one of the greatest lessons that I have learned from the Rebbe. This is one of the greatest guiding principles that the Rebbe, I feel with the Rebbe with me always, that you can be an individual in your own little place of the world, but don't underestimate the global impact that you have in making differences in your individual life. And I want to tell you people, you don't point your hand and say you, but I want to tell all my friends in South Africa, I learned that lesson while I was in Johannesburg. I learned that lesson one night when I was sitting in the yeshiva. At that point, the yeshiva was in the big hall of, I guess it's now the Torah Academy Shul. And it was a ordinary night, but I was thinking a lot about, I would say life, but I was thinking a lot about purpose. My shlichus in South Africa was amazing, but personally, I had a few challenges that because at that time, the Rebbe sent us for 2 years straight, I needed to miss some very important simchas in my life. And of course, the Rebbe is my Rebbe and I did it gladly, but it doesn't mean that it didn't force me to think about what is really the purpose of being so far and being sent to a very distant place to make a difference. And I just don't know why, but at that night, right across the table, I just looked there and there was a sicha, a recently published talk of the Rebbe that has been published recently in a book. And that was a talk that the Rebbe explained about, he spoke to the Kinos HaShluchim. He spoke to the Shluchim that were all gathered in America that time. And he explained how literally the question that a shliach may think of, why are you in this remote corner? And the Rebbe explained so beautifully that even when you're in a remote corner, it doesn't mean you're remote from a global purpose. In fact, on the contrary, the only way the entire world can raise to its purpose is when everyone in all their corners does what they have to. Because when you do something in your particular place of life, it's not just impacting that place. It's a spark of light that connects to other sparks. And in the end, will create a global light, the light of Mashiach. We must never, ever, ever look at ourselves as just another person. We must always look at ourselves as another piece of the puzzle, which completes the puzzle when the right thing is done. And I want to share with you a beautiful story I heard recently that further describes this idea of the Rebbe. Now, many of you have heard about the Simchas Torah by the Rebbe. Many of you have heard about the incredible energy that was in the Rebbe's shul on Simchas Torah. We all know what goes on in a Chabad house, a Lubavitch shul on Simchas Torah. It's just unbelievable. It's spectacular. It's different. It's special. Now, just imagine that what goes on in your Chabad house, in your shul, on the night of Simchas Torah, is amplified and magnified thousands of times, exponentially. So not just 1,000 times of what goes on, but the power and the energy of that, how it took place in the shul of the Rebbe in 770. The place is packed. The place, thousands and thousands of men in the men's shul and thousands of women in the women's shul. And it's just full of this incredible energy. And the Rebbe stands in the corner, in the front corner of the shul. Whoops. The Rebbe stands in the front corner of the shul, and with his hands, just brings you all up, us all up to a different level. And the Rebbe himself visibly is in a completely different state as those who know how the Rebbe would act on Simchas Torah even before he was Rebbe. The Rebbe, the joy of Simchas Torah was something very unique to the Rebbe and his neshama, his soul. Certainly, as he expressed it to Chassidim. And here you have thousands of people from the entire world. And what the Rebbe is doing is not just making everyone dance and be happier. What the Rebbe is doing is infusing energy into the Chassidim of the entire world, so they go back with that energy of joy, and it's shared with all the people. It was a global, it was an amazing, uplifting event that was a completely otherworldly and this worldly at the same time. For those who weren't there, I want to use a very secular metaphor, and then I'll show you why this is different. Imagine you're following your favorite sports team. I would never became familiar with the whole sports scene in South Africa, but in America, let's say it's football, right? And my team in Philadelphia are the Philadelphia Eagles. And imagine you go into a stadium of 55,000 people, and this is the championship. And this is the last second, and your team is tied. And imagine at the last second, your team in a packed stadium, at the final moments where they can win their championship, they score and they win. Imagine the eruption of joy and energy in that stadium. The only difference is that the eruption of the stadium is very superficial. Imagine the eruption of joy amongst the players themselves who just won the Super Bowl, the national championship. Imagine how elated, imagine the electricity, the energy of the people who won, the players themselves. Imagine there was a stadium of 55,000 players who were excited. Imagine the joy and the energy. And this is lahavdil, the energy that was in the Rebbe's shul. Not a spectator sport, but the Rebbe was infusing energy into thousands of players who were feeling the prize that they were receiving. I'm bringing this all up because it was just magnificent, otherworldly. All shluchim, people from the entire world were given honors. This was a global spiritual experience. What happened? In 1980, Tafshin Mem Aleph, it was the year that the Rebbe founded Tzivos Hashem. It was the year that the Rebbe started the children's organization. And that year, the Rebbe invited the children up to his bima to dance with him for one of the hakafas, I think, but certainly for part of the hakafas, to be with him to sing this hakafas. And imagine how I just illustrated to you, and it's only a mush, I can't even describe fully what it was. The Rebbe's up there in the bima, looking at the whole world through the representatives there, lifting up the whole world, and right there next to him are the children. And there's one child who was there, who holds onto the Rebbe's gartel. He was so close. He holds onto the Rebbe's gartel because he wanted to have a physical connection. And they're dancing. And there's this all energy. And in the middle of all this, there's a little child whose yarmulke falls off. And the Rebbe stops the dance and tells his kid, shows him the yarmulke, that he should pick up the yarmulke. So this kid who's holding onto the gartel pushes through and picks up the yarmulke and puts it on the kid's head. Amazing. But that's not the story I want to bring out. The kid is crowded and he pushes his way back because he wants to get that prize to hold the gartel. He gets back to the Rebbe. The Rebbe looks at him and says, thank you. You understand? Otherworldly, if this great moment of great spiritual ecstasy, cloud, global influence, global change. But a little boy did something. The Rebbe said thank you to the little boy in the midst of this great spiritual other and this worldly moment. This is what the Rebbe taught us. This is what the Rebbe demonstrated to us. That every prat and every individual is part of the greater purpose. A democracy and freedom based on faith, not just an absolute faith, but an abstract faith. But faith in the purpose of Hashem is the strongest freedom. So my friends, this is what we need to take from what's everything happening in the world. When we talk about lives matter, there are serious issues and issues that need to be dealt with and hopefully will be dealt with. But when ordinary people like you and I are looking at this, see, what can I do? It's not just about marching. It's not just about protesting. It's we have to channel all this into a perspective into our lives. Because when our life matters, we can make other people's lives matters. But if we just scream, this life matters and that life matters, and then we go home and we're not better people, then what have we accomplished? The it that we all have to do is learning from what's going on and making sure it makes our life matter. So we can do what we need to do in our individual spaces to make the global difference that Hashem wants us to make. So I want to conclude with the following thought. Yesterday in the Torah, we read about Bikurim, about farmers bringing their first fruits of produce to Yerushalayim. And recently I read an essay from one of my colleagues. I forgot where I read this, but it was very interesting. Bikurim is bringing the first fruits to the Holy Temple right when they started growing. Now, imagine you're a farmer, you're living in Israel, and there wasn't the bullet train or whatever they call it from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in a half hour. It meant days of walking up to Yerushalayim, days walking back, talk about a good 2-3 weeks of lost work. And this wasn't at the end of production on Sukkot's time. This was in the beginning when things are starting to blossom and develop. In fact, the law was that as soon as a farmer saw one fruit starting to bud, you put a little string around it, and as soon as that was able to be brought to Yerushalayim, you had to stop everything and go up to Yerushalayim. Now, we're not talking about bringing tons of food to Jerusalem after the produce. You're talking about in high time. When you need to be there most, you're told, take this little basket of fruit, forget about what's going on at the business, and go to Yerushalayim. What's the idea in that? Here's a very important idea that Torah is teaching us. Torah is teaching us that we must pay close attention to when things begin to happen, because later on it may be too late. When things begin to bud, when the light begins to shine, capture that light and recognize the blessing that Hashem has given you in the beginning. Because when you recognize it in the beginning, everything else changes. That's why we have Modeh Ani in the morning. That's why we take challah before we eat bread, we take a piece. It's all about capturing the transition. And when you capture that transition, it will be able to affect later on. Don't wait later. And why I say this is because we are all going through this transition. We've all changed. Things have changed in everybody's life. Capture those things. There's a lot of darkness. There's a lot of many challenges, but there are rays of light that are bursting through. Don't wait till a week or 2 or 3 when things go back to normal and then consider what this meant to you. Capture it now, because the genesis, the bereshis, the sprouting is what's most critical. And perhaps now we're in a more critical time than we were for the last 3 months, because as we begin to emerge from crisis, it's when you have to capture the good, that change, before everything starts to set back in, and before you know it, you're back to normal. God forbid. Chas v'sholom, we should be back to normal. And hopefully we're able to take these lessons that we have learned during this past time and use it as the beginning and the foundation to build a proper freedom, a stronger freedom, a freedom that is true and lasting. Not necessarily a freedom for a government and a society and the world. If you can do that and you're in the position to do that, great. But you don't have to be there to bring freedom and understanding to the world. As the Rebbe always taught us, the Yachid, the Prat, what you accomplish in your space does have global significance. So, Yasher Koyach, Rabbi Mesinter, for giving me this opportunity to reflect on these issues for myself. And hopefully we were able to help some others and share it.
Rabbi Shem Tov, intriguing and inspiring, very thoughtful. We just have time for 3 questions because we're running out of time. A question from Moshe Montrose.
Moshe,
okay. What is your take on trying to rewrite American history, taking down the statutes and rewriting the American anthem?
That's a very, very good question that I will be honest, I don't know. There's a lot of, I'm exploring the idea, but I think this whole idea is fresh. And my initial take is that, once you go down that road, where do things end? We are evolving people, we're evolving nation, evolving country, and history is very important. I would say, instead of taking down statues, just my initial thought is, put up the statues of people that you really want to show that countered these ideas. But to erase parts of history because of the woes or the negative things that were done in the past, I'm not sure. I'll leave that to historians. But I saw a good meme the other day of people in Egypt demonstrating to take down the pyramids because they were built by slaves. Actually on Independence Mall, right next to the Liberty Bell, they have reconstructed slave houses. That's probably the appropriate way. So you give the whole picture of seeing what it was like then, what these people were like, and actually when you're able to draw the contrast, it may be a better picture because then it shows you how far we have come and where we still have to go. My initial thoughts.
I'm going to join the last 2 questions. Number 1 is, just tell us a little bit about the Jewish community in Philadelphia. How many Jews, etc., the challenges, if there are any. And if you conclude with just giving us something down to earth. You spoke about Bikurim, the beginning, watch it at the beginning. What should we all be taking upon ourselves in a practical, give us one or two practical things to do. And I'm going to end with that and thank you now for the time that you've given us.
Well, the Jewish community in Philadelphia is really just a reflection of the Jewish community throughout America. There are a lot of Jews. There's over 300,000 Jews living in Philadelphia in the suburbs. A very strong mix of across the entire spectrum of different movements. But there's a strong presence of Jews in every aspect of the city, all over the city. There are many shuls, mikvahs. There is the only part we don't have is because we are so in between 2 other strong strongholds. Is I wouldn't say that the Jewish food scene is the best, but other than that, we have everything that every typical American Jewish city has. So what are the practical things we can do? The practical things to do is sit down, take a piece of paper, and think of the things that you have found out about yourself and others, and make sure that you use this time not to chase the dreams that were shattered in March, but to chase the ideas and to run after the opportunities with the people in your life and the things in your life that survived March and are as important now as they will always be. Those are the core elements of your life. And take a pen and take a paper, take your iPad, your computer, your keyboard, whatever it is that you communicate. Write the 5 things that you have learned about yourself and others, and let that be the chart. Let that be your bikurim of how you can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Shem Tov. It was really inspiring, and I'm sure I enjoyed it. I'm sure everyone else enjoyed it as well. So thank you for giving your time.
My pleasure.
And,
The pleasure. Are we
and
over?
for all those that are listening, please join us tomorrow night for Kabbalah. We have a weekly Kabbalah class with Rabbi Dubov. It's a class not to be missed. And thank you for joining. Have a great evening.